But this is the 14th of June, and this is my mother's birthday, so happy birthday, Mom. Behind every great man is a great woman. And Mom was born in 28, Houston, Texas, valedictorian of her class in high school, went to Xavier, where she met my father, graduated cum laude, then went on to nursing school at Boston. Had it been in this day and age, she probably would have gone to medical school. My father always used to say that he always looked for the person who got the higher grade than he did in chemistry class. And when he found out who it was, he married her. They got married in 1952. She moved to Omaha. She was a nurse on staff at St. Catherine's Hospital, one of the teaching hospitals at Creighton University, where my father trained, and did so until she had 3 children. After that, she had to kind of stay at home and watch the children. She then raised 7 kids, 5 boys and 2 girls, and most people say, like, what the heck? But along the way, participated in a lot of other hospital auxiliary functions, and something of note was the Omaha's Panel of American Women, who were devoted to a thoughtful examination and discussion of racial and social issues at the time. Okay. What I'd like to do now is run a short video that came from the college, was produced by the college, and is edited by my brother, Greg Organ, who's a surgeon out in California. He's retired now. Icons in American Surgery. It'll kind of just give you an idea of who my father was and the kind of things that he did, what led to him being kind of the person he is, and then I'll end up talking a little bit about his history.
Claude Organ Jr. was an African-American surgeon who embodied the ACS slogan, science, innovation, and moral values. His exemplary leadership role in American surgery has been widely acknowledged. What was the background that spawned his incredible work ethic and discipline, inspired his agile intellect, and unwavering commitment to becoming a surgeon? He believed that experienced physicians and surgeons have a responsibility to pass the torch and share their knowledge with younger physicians and surgeons. In his eyes, this was his greatest achievement. This video demonstrates his absolute mastery in surgical education in 1973 when he was chair of surgery at Creighton University.
The anterior abdominal wall is the principal access route to the peritoneal cavity, and incisions involving it are employed countless times each day in both elective and emergency operations. This part of the human body, aside from its utilization for incisions, is the site for a variety of congenital and acquired lesions. Noteworthy among these are the penetrating wound of the abdomen, caput medusa as a manifestation of portal hypertension, single or multiple drain insertions are their complications, an epigastric hernia, the abdominal wall flap for extremity coverage, bowel exteriorization as a reflection of drug toxicity, the umbilical hernia, prosthetic graft insertion, a malignancy of the anterior abdominal wall, both primary and metastatic, the postoperative ventral hernia, congenital anomalies of the anterior abdominal wall, a persistent urachal malformation, the abdominal wall hematoma, and a benign tumor such as a lipoma. Of the numerous factors that warrant consideration in the selection of abdominal incision, none is more important than the anatomy of the anterior abdominal wall. It is our purpose here to review with you some of the salient anatomical and topographical features of this area that will be helpful to you in the selection, extension, and the closure of these incisions.
Talking about Claude Organ is sort of both a pleasure and some remorse at his passing. He and I got to be very close in the last few years of his life, and did some things together that I extremely benefited from and enjoyed. He used a phrase for me every time we talked about something serious. He said, "What's the right thing?" And that was an interesting definition. For him, the right thing was what was fair and equitable and appreciated all the interests and stakeholders involved. He just was a wonderful person, and I thought his theme and image of the latter part of his life was, what is the right thing? Let's do the right thing. He's a really great person and a great friend, and helped me with hundreds of things.
Claude Organ Jr. was born in Marshall, Texas in 1928, the middle of three children to Claude H. Organ Sr. and Adelina Pemberton, and raised in Denison, Texas, in a family with a long history of and priority for academic achievement. Claude Sr. was the son of former slaves who were illiterate but still managed to buy a house and an 88-acre farm. Claude Sr. was the first Texas resident to attend and graduate from Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. Claude Sr. was a second lieutenant in World War I. After the war, his officer's training gave him a presence, the discipline, and an air of dignity that served him well against the constant and harsh racial treatment he faced in his supervisory position on a railroad mail car in the Depression-era Deep South. His son, Claude Jr., saw his father endure these indignities and learned valuable lessons that served him well. In the eyes of Claude, his father was a hero, much like Jackie Robinson, who is with breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, number 42. His mother, Adelina Pemberton, a twin, was one of a family of 10, all college graduates that became teachers, physicians, and a lawyer. She received her BA from a college in Marshall, Texas, where her father, Henry Bertram Pemberton, was the first graduate, and her mother, Norella, was the first female graduate, who both became renowned teachers and were born into slavery. In 1894, Henry Pemberton mortgaged everything he owned to help build the first high school for African Americans in Marshall, Central High School, later renamed Pemberton High School. Adelina carried on the Pemberton legacy of teaching, but died early in Claude Jr.'s life from tuberculosis. The Pemberton legacy inspired him to achieve and teach, and heavily contributed to his teaching style that contributes to his renown. Claude received his education in the segregated public schools of Denison, Texas. He graduated valedictorian from Terrell High School. Growing up in Denison, the dangerous realities of racial segregation in the Jim Crow South were ever apparent. Claude and Adelina instilled in their three children a strong sense of dignity and self-worth that did not allow them to think of themselves as less than any other person, a belief that was integral to his approach to mentoring. 1944, Claude attended Xavier University in New Orleans, Louisiana. It was at this juncture that he was blessed to meet Elizabeth Mays. Elizabeth was a match, if not his superior, in every virtuous way. I was constantly intrigued by one student, Claude said, who always outscored me in chemistry, so I married her.
My name is Elizabeth Mays Organ, better known as Betty. I met Claude and his sister Claudesta the very first day I arrived at Xavier University in New Orleans, Louisiana, to register. Claude and his buddies were at the door of the gym looking over all the girls who were coming in. And he walked up to me and said, "What might your name be, Crab?" And I said, "I'm Crab Elizabeth Mays. I'm from Houston, Texas." And he said, and I asked him, "What might your name be, Mr. Worthy of Glassman?" He said, "My name is Claude Harold Organ, Jr." And I looked at him and said, "Oh, I know all about you." He turned to his buddies because they all wanted to know, "What do you know? What do you know about him?" And I said, "You played in the band with my next door neighbor, Conrad Johnson, playing the bass fiddle. And you were just as arrogant as you could be." And he was smart, he knew it. But you know the rest of the story. Because he went on to be president of the American College of Surgeons.
Claude briefly returned to Denison early in his freshman year at Xavier to register for service in the U.S. Armed Forces. He was committed to pursuing a career in medicine, but faced steep obstacles. It was 1944, and heavy emphasis on training physicians for the war was well underway. He received a deferment to pursue his pre-med studies. After World War II ended in 1945, the only Negro medical schools, Howard and Meharry, were training physicians at capacity. Many returning veterans already had commitments from these institutions, and there was little thought that a black man could be admitted anywhere else. He saw no realistic chance of pursuing his goal in medicine. It was at this major turning point that his uncle Charles Pemberton assisted Claude in taking a bold approach during his senior year to rekindle his vanishing aspirations to become a physician. Under the guidance of Charles Pemberton, Claude applied to the University of Texas Medical School. With an impressive academic record, he passed the qualifications for admission, but would not matriculate because blacks were not allowed to attend. Upon graduation, he returned to Denison, biding his time teaching sciences at his alma mater, Terrell High School, letting the strategy unfold. Charles Pemberton enlisted the aid of Texas Senator Sam Rayburn, then the Speaker of the House of Representatives. They utilized a legal maneuver that was being utilized across the country, spearheaded by Thurgood Marshall, to enforce the separate but equal statutes enshrined in the landmark Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896. Charles Pemberton and Senator Rayburn persuaded the University of Texas of their legal responsibility to provide for his medical education as a Texas resident, since there was no separate Negro medical school in the state. The University of Texas Medical School offered to pay his expenses to attend any institution he gained admittance to. As circumstances would have it, Creighton University Medical School in Omaha, Nebraska, under the deanship of Reverend Harry B. Crimmins, embarked upon integrating their student body, the first U.S. Catholic medical school to make such a commitment. Aware of Claude's plight, Reverend Harold Perry of the Archdiocese of New Orleans, the first African American to serve as bishop in the Roman Catholic Church, recommended Claude for Father Crimmins' consideration. Father Crimmins was so impressed with Claude, he gave him an application, and Claude's dream became reality. He entered the Creighton University Medical School in the fall of 1948.
And probably my most favorite organism, which is a very powerful and prophetic one, he wrote in 1963 when he said, "Once they let me in the door and I learned the rules, I had two more responsibilities: to be excellent in everything I did and to show others the way. I believe that your presence here today is a tribute to his life that he lived. Thank you very much." Excel
he did. His sister Claudesta noted that it was at Creighton that his passion for medicine took flight, particularly during summer externships that he arranged in Houston with Charles Pemberton, and the extensive pathology that he was exposed to. These early clinical experiences formulated his desire to take care of the whole patient, to become a general surgeon. Betty had matriculated to Boston, being the first African American to be admitted to St. Elizabeth's Nursing School, graduating in 1951. During his third year at Creighton, he decided to marry Elizabeth, thus beginning a 53-year partnership. Claude graduated in 1952 and stayed at Creighton to train in general surgery. Claude continued to impress his professors with his breadth and understanding, clinical experience, and determination to be the best technical surgeon he could become. After completing residency and fulfilling his service commitment in the Navy at Camp Pendleton, he came back to Creighton and began an academic surgical career that spanned 45 years. From 1960 to 1982, he rapidly advanced through the academic ranks at Creighton University, the last 11 years as the chief of the Department of Surgery, building a top-flight Department of Surgery and a widely sought-after general surgery residency training program. From 1982 to 1988, he was professor at the University of Oklahoma and chief of surgery at the Veterans Administration Hospital. 1988, he took on a surgery residency training program and surgical service at Highland Hospital in Oakland, California. William Blaisdell, then the chairman of surgery at the University of California, Davis, stated, quote, "I can't think of any situation more politicized and unionized. The surgery residency program was hanging by a thread with the threat of closure by the RRC," end quote. Claude rapidly built up the faculty and shored up the residency program, developing it into another widely sought-after general surgery training program. As L.D. Britt noted, the surgery residency received commendations for a program of excellence in Dr. Organ's final review by the RRC.
I remembered back to my first experience with Dr. Organ in the operating room, which, like all of my memories of Dr. Organ, is indelibly printed in my mind. But more than anything, what I remember about that day is watching Dr. Organ operate and thinking that in many ways it was like watching an elite athlete or a concert pianist in terms of economy of movement and real gracefulness, without wasted movements and without hesitation. And also the way in which the room was an orchestra and he was clearly the conductor and the master and commander of that room. And so I think it's very fitting that these surgical suites are named in honor of Dr. Organ for all the teaching and all the excellence that he instilled in the rooms. I think that as a former trainee, that I will carry the lessons he taught me really throughout my life. And I consider his teaching one of the greatest gifts of my professional career.
I had a unique relationship with Claude because I knew him at this little-known Jesuit school in Omaha where I went to medical school, and he was early on a teacher and a mentor of mine, and I never forgot that. He then, of course, moved to Oakland, and I helped him with his residency program there with some of his residents that came to San Francisco for training. But my greatest pleasure was assisting Claude achieve his goals as president of the American College of Surgeons. And he wanted to make certain that his year as president was remembered as the year of the resident, namely to make the college really relevant to the young people who are entering this wonderful profession of ours. And I think he truly turned the college around, and for that I am most grateful. When he retired and he attended his last Board of Regents meeting 1 year ago, almost to the day in New Orleans, so much has changed in 1 year, he was presented with a lovely crystal in celebration of his many years of dedicated service to the American College of Surgeons. And on that crystal there was inscribed from William Jennings Bryan a saying which I think really sums up Claude's life very appropriately, that destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. And it's not a thing to be wanted for, it is a thing to be achieved. And I think we all agree that Claude Organ achieved so much in his lifetime. He was able to realize to his fullness the destiny of his life.
nice, Brian.
Thank you. So let me just talk a little bit about my father. This is his from his CV. A lot of this my brother went through. It's a very nice presentation that the college put on. But after the presentation stops, and he went to Oklahoma for about 5 or 6 years, and there developed, did a lot of traveling, had a chance to explore a lot of his ideas. It was during this period of time that he was, I think, president of the Southwest Surgical Congress, and gave an interesting talk about the interlocking of American surgery, which kind of looked at people's where they trained, what they did, who became a chairman, who became a department chair, who became an editor, who became president of the American College of Surgeons or other surgical groups, and assigned different numbering systems to them, and looked at, where people trained. And there was an obvious correlation between where people trained and who they trained with and who they interacted with and what happened to them in life. His CV is a monster. It is, he was a part of almost 38 or 40 medical societies. This is just a short list of those. It's 57 pages long, over 150 papers, and most of them in peer-reviewed journals. There were 12 abstracts, 54 book chapters, book reviews, 10 manuscripts described as limited distribution. One of them was his master's thesis. Others were white papers for this or that. There were 41 editorials, no surprise there, 10 exhibits, 27 pages of presentations from all over the world. And you can see he held a large number of honorary fellowships. These were a few of his professional activities throughout his life over the course of 30, 40 years in medicine. Significant ones, and to some, but to me, chairman of the surgical section of the NMA, president of the Southwest Surgical Congress, member, senior examiner, chair of the board of the American Board of Surgery, member of the Residency Review Committee, editor of the archives, first vice president of the college, president of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, president of the Western Surgical, on the editorial boards of numerous publications, Faroes, Australia, New Zealand, Journal of Surgical Care, the Asian Surgical Society from Hong Kong, and then a number of offices with the American College of Surgeons, ending in his presidency in 2003. Unofficially, there were a number of things that he did that gave him insight into the world of business and how corporations are run. Something that stood him well as he developed departments at home at Creighton, later giving advice to others, and then again at UC Davis in the East Bay. But they were varied. Things like Urban Coalition, Urban Housing Foundation, trusteeships at various universities, Howard University, Meharry, Fontbonne, chairman and trustee of the Board of Trustees at Xavier, his alma mater. And things I think were really significant were the directorship of Northwestern, or director at Northwestern Bell Telephone Company, which was based in Omaha, the St. Paul's companies, which were based in Minnesota. Those also provided some income for his 7 children who were being educated all over the country at the time, at Stanford and Harvard. And he thought very highly of. He had a list of honorary degrees from all over the country and the world. Key amongst those are fellowship in the Royal College of Surgeons of South Africa in 86. Interesting time to go to South Africa. That was a trip my mother didn't go on. She was against some of the policies of apartheid at that time. Fellowship in the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons in 89. The Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland, and then the Royal College of Surgeons of England, the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh, and the West African College of Surgeons. He got a number of honorary degrees from in Greece, from the Shanghai Second Medical University. And then he had a number of honors and awards when you look at the CV. The Nina Stair Bronwald Award from the Association of Women Surgeons was something he was very proud of and worked extremely hard on. He was, as you read some of the remembrances of my father in the Archives of Surgery's edition on him, he was a stalwart advocate for residents and surgeons, no matter what package they came in. And he was particularly aggressive because of some of his own experiences with colleagues through medical school and residency and training, and women in his department, and sensitive as a Black physician, as you can understand, to some of the obstacles and barriers that they faced. And these were kindred spirits, and he didn't miss an opportunity to stimulate and encourage. The Southwestern Surgical Congress has an annual lectureship in his name in the basic sciences. He was a traveling fellow for the Association of Surgeons of Great Britain and Ireland in 2000. He received the college's Distinguished Service Award in 1999, the Caduceus Award from his alma mater, Creighton, in 2000, for distinguished service to the university and elsewhere. He got the ACGME's Parker Palmer Courage to Teach Award. And then there's a Resident Research Award with the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, which was instituted in 2003. At UCSF, he got the Faculty Award, the Martin Luther King Award in 2004. There's an endowed chair at Xavier established by the family and my mother at the time of his passing for a professor in the biological sciences. And then the thing that's really known well for is the Traveling Fellowship Award established by the family and friends of Claude Organ at the college. And the list of people who've received the award is like a who's who of Black surgeons in America. Patricia Turner, as you know, just recently was named executive director of the College for the Future. Melania Kibbe is a professor and chair down here in North Carolina. And there's a large number of other folks here, just too numerous to count, all of them distinguished people in their own rights. A Century of Black Surgeons was a product of probably 5 to 10 years of thought on his part, selecting the people, browbeating the people, collecting the manuscripts, getting invited commentary. The majority of that is probably due to Margaret Kasiba, his executive assistant throughout a number of years. And I was fortunate enough to proofread some of the manuscripts and write one of my own. A monumental attachment. And which brings me to Margaret Kasiba. She had a couple of things to say about him in her memoirs, but she mentioned often how much he learned from corporate America, serving on the boards of Boys Town, Northwestern Bell, St. Paul's companies. Studying assets and liabilities and profit margins and financial responsibilities was such a different thing than studying endocrine surgery and general surgery. But those were lessons that he learned and brought back to the program in terms of managing the department. And he was an early advocate of cost containment long before it became a hallmark of American medicine. He also had the benefit of my older brother Claude, who was getting an MBA at Harvard at the time, who really taught him the ins and outs of reading a balance sheet. And she was always struck by his kindness, his fairness, his passion, his striking membership, and the remarkable ability to never any quest for excellence. In fact, my brother Claude said if he had coined the phrase striving for excellence before Lexus, he probably made a whole bunch of money off of that. And then he was a tireless advocate for residency training in minority diversity, something that she thought would carry many of us, including a lot of his trainees, through the future years, like you heard Dr. Gosnell say. LD Britt commented that none of us are going to go through a number of people and places that he had been, significant places where he did things. LD Britt commented that he was a natural because what he embodied, the principles and requirements that he was asked to enforce as a member of the Residency Review Committee were an emphasis on accreditation, competency, performance excellence, and outcome measurements. He was fond of saying that, you know, medical school, and in fact more so residency, is not a good place for remedial action. And he was unparalleled in his request and insistence upon that there was one strike zone for all programs, and that if you lowered the standards for one, you were not helping the residents and or the program. But if there were deficiencies, he was tireless and it would do anything that he could do to give you insight to how to correct those. And I think a lot of friendships came from that as well. The Society of Black Academic Surgeons is another place that he invested a lot of time in. People say he was the originator of it. There's probably some truth to that, but he insisted that other people come along and be a part of this process and help him develop it, because it's not something that he could do alone. It started in '87 at a meeting in New Orleans at the American College of Surgeons, and was attended by some notable people at the time. And then Mr. Eichley was a significant supporter from Davis and Geck. And the whole thing was to find a place where you can organize, network, provide places where young surgeons could learn how to develop their academic careers and benefit from some of the things that some of the more mature members of the society knew: how to run a meeting, how to write a paper, how to write a grant, committees and things to get on inside of hospitals or in national organizations, how to do a number of things that weren't something that was actively, taught in residency, or there weren't role models or mentors to show you how to do these things. And of course, the hallmark of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons is Charles Drew. A comment by John Norman, who some of you may know, is that our heritage is richer for some of the courses set by others. What we wish to do with this marvelous legacy remains to be seen. That challenge and that opportunity are here. Here are a number of the past presidents of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, of who's a Black surgeon in America. And many of these names all of you know and well. From this Association of Women Surgeons, Lee Newmeyer said that Claude personified the mission of the AWS to encourage and enable women surgeons to realize their personal and professional goals. To him, surgeons were surgeons, no matter what their package. He was noted for providing the gentle push or pull, especially for those who, for reasons of race, sex, or socioeconomic status, were not able to make it over the hurdles of on their own. And you could frequently see him at meetings talking to an individual who might approach him, or seeking a person out after a presentation to give them suggestions, or to try and get their manuscript. Pat Newman, who became the second female president of the college, said Dr. Organ was the conscious of American surgery with regards to issues of Black and female surgeons. And for that, he was awarded the Nina Starr Brownwell Award by the AWS in 1993. This is just a picture of their website, speaking to how they were founded in 1981 by Patricia Newman. And she invited a number of female surgeons to identify, as many as she could identify, to breakfast Wednesday morning at the American College of Surgeons. And their goals are to engage, empower, and encourage women to excel in what they do. In an editorial that he wrote many years ago in 1993 toward a more complete society, this is one of the things about Bob that was very curious. He had a love of words. And so to look at some of these things, as he was noting some of the women who had been appointed to significant positions in American surgery, like Ola Johansson as the director of the Department of Education, Surgical Services, Catherine Anderson as the secretary of the college, and Dr. Geis as president of the Association of Academic Surgeons. He got in here because women have been sedulous students of surgery. I concluded that this issue should be devoid of voluminous reports, should demonstrate their scientific work, and should not flagellate the social issues involving women in surgery. Took me to the dictionary. And he ended with, as we enter the 21st century, we share as surgeons the highest ideals of patient care, creative research, and education. Our similarities will continue to be our hyperbolic interpretation of our results and the downsizing of our failures. Surgery is on the verge of becoming the champagne of all specialties. So, you sit there, my brothers and I would always wonder, where does this guy get this stuff? But that was just who he was. He was that creative of an individual. Now, notice in the references, down here at the very bottom, there is, and from the Surgical Bulletin of the American College of Surgeons, are there too many surgical societies? This always caused me great humor, because here's a man who had his own surgical society, okay? Now, it was formed by the residents of Creighton and the University of California, San Diego, and they had a ceremony in New Orleans at the American College of Surgeons. You'll notice here that there's the subscription or the signature of Bob Gibson, the noted pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, who was there at the time and said a few words about my father. They were very good friends. He's from Omaha, Nebraska, and resides there now. But it just was always humorous that he would have his own surgical society and be the one writing about it. He also became art editor of the Archives of Surgery, and in this regard, this was his world. At this point in time, he was involved in resident education, had been a chairman, had been on a number of editorial boards, and this allowed him to flourish and expand his insight, his reach into issues in surgery, and help younger surgeons of all races and sexes and nationalities, and it didn't matter where you came from. You had the good idea, a good paper, he put you in the journal, in the archives. This was a compilation of articles from surgeons from around the world about what was surgery like in their country. It offered insight for us in this country and those who read the archives, what life is like elsewhere in the world. As chairman of the American College of Surgeons and the American Board of Surgery, there were a number of contentious issues that showed up on his doorstep. And he had been a member and an examiner with the board. And there were a number of things that he had to do initially. The first thing he did was found that there was a lot of disarray in the administrative management of the board. He brought in a full-time physician executive director, Ward Griffin from the University of Kentucky. Interestingly enough, he started on the first day. Claude became chairman of the American board. There were changes to the written exam with scoring, the evaluation of questions. On the oral boards, candidates were initially evaluated at the end of a long day, as opposed to, and they changed this up to get a better evaluation of candidates. After the first three, the 6 examiners who looked at that person would then sit down with those candidates fresh on their minds and then submit a grade or pass or fail. There was a reorganization of the board's finances, something that many attribute with continuing the solvency of the board. And so each exam served as its own cost center. Now, these were things that he learned from industry and from corporate life and corporate boards. And I'm sure that during this time period, when he would go to board meetings of corporations, he would ask his colleagues there, how would you manage this problem? There was the contentious issue of vascular surgery certificates, and I'm sure some of the older heads in the room know this well. These were bare knuckle discussions at times. But it ended up that we needed capacity in this country. We needed the capacity to have patients who had vascular surgery in our communities, but it also needed to be safe. And so initially, there was a grandfathering process, which was a tedious process, is my recollection. And my father oversaw that for the board because each case had to be discussed and each person's data had to be looked at. But now the vascular surgery has their own board. But this was a serious quality issue and financial issue at the time. And then the issue of allowing physicians or doctors of osteopathy to enter the certification process for the American Board of Surgery. Up until that time, you had to hold an MD degree. But in 1984, the year that he began his chairmanship, 17 of 32 member boards of the ABMS had already accepted DOs for certification process. The federal government had mandated military residencies do the same. Legal opinions were obtained and all agreed that they can no longer exclude DOs. This was on the agenda item as in his first meeting as a chairman and was approved 2-1. One can only imagine the types of discussions that were had prior to that meeting. My father was never one to come to a gunfight without knowing who else was in the room with him. This is the Archives journal that highlights his life and visits with a number of his friends who wrote nice pieces about him and remembrances. Some of those we've seen throughout the course of the presentation already. One of the ones that was always interesting to me was on the nature of civility, and Dr. Freischlag liked that as well. But in it, he took umbrance and took the occasion to gently prod, like he normally did, colleagues who he didn't think were doing the right thing, who would get up and toast the president in a negative way or say bad things. And he did not think this gave a good impression to our foreign colleagues or even to our own domestic colleagues. And so he went on a rant about civility. He also broke down that, this art of giving a toast before a meal was as old as the Greeks and was began the practice of drinking to each other's health before a meeting. A good faith gesture destined to excuse the nasty habit the Greeks had of poisoning the punch. The Romans improved upon this and used to put a piece of burnt bread, toast, in the goblet to mellow the flavor of the wine. It was this char on the chunk of bread that did it. And that's how toast became part of our social vocabulary and our public practice. Just one of these funny things my father would just take off on to chastise his colleagues in a gentle way, but also inform. One of my favorites was, he asked me to read this before he went and gave this in Australia. And I was just dumbfounded that, 2 or 3 paragraphs in, he's talking about Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And that all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. And then proceeded to equivocate this to what was happening to general surgery at the time and the loss of all of the different specialties to their own separate boards and the fragmentation that was occurring to the mother specialty. And then he works in that this attrition has continued, leaving a beleaguered Humpty Dumpty with its reproductive faculties seriously wounded. Another one of these things that he can get to an issue with words that, it makes people laugh. In one of the meetings at the college, a gentleman came up to me and saw my last name and said, I was at that lecture. And he said, this was a very clever chap, is what he said. This shows some pictures of him in Cape Town receiving fellowship from a female president of the College of Medicine in South Africa. Something he can see this big smile on his face. He was just so happy about this at the time. Now, this is still in apartheid South Africa. This shows him with a couple of his friends, Professor Myberg and Professor Treblanche, at the same time. This, he thought, friendships in surgery were made because people had a common interest and goal, and that generated the friendships. That started the conversation. And what happened after that? Well, it was up to the individual. He came back in 1994, right after de Klerk had ceded the presidency of South Africa to Mandela, within months. And he led with this, talking about some of his favorite guys in American surgery. Every man is my brother, and each man's burden is my own. Where poverty exists, all are poor. Where hatred flourishes, all are corrupted. Where justice reigns, all are unequal. Whitney Young was a good friend of my father's. He was head of the National Urban League. He started out in Omaha at the Nebraska Urban League, but he led with that at a time with great strife and concern and in South Africa. Just an idea of who this guy was in terms of when he hit the room. He was looking for it to unseat you a little bit, but then he went to talk about Charles Drew, Jack Norman, and the things that they had done in American surgery. On the impact of surgery, and technology on surgery, he got right to the heart of it in the first or second paragraph, where he said, "The horns of our dilemma are this: should a nation have to choose between constraining these fulfilling these interesting things of technology?" He talks about the developments in technology since World War II in this country: cardiac bypass, laparoscopy, computer tomography, radioimmunoassays, or fulfilling the human desire that no one is denied medical care because of cost. Doesn't get much more to the point than that, I guess. This is a reflection and memoriam that the American College of Surgeons had in San Francisco. My father has strong Atlanta connections. His good friend was Dean Warren, who was chairman, and I know that these words had been said at Emory before, but he thought Dean was a stand-up guy, that he would, in times when there were discussions about meaningful things in surgical education or policy or racial or gender issues, he just stood up and told it what it is, how it was, and he did that from knowledge, vision, intellectual honesty, and a penetrating wit. And he thought we needed more people who were aristocrats of courage and intelligence like Dr. Warren. His good friend, Dr. Yurkiewicz, who he called Polish soul brother number one and probably the best hidden general surgeon in the country. Good friend. They always used to have these very erudite discussions. I was privileged to be there for a number of them. Couldn't hang, but was in the room. I list this because these two people showed up in the same issue of the American Surgical when my father passed away back in 2005. Gene Petrick, who was a professor at Emory, and then went on back to Sloan Kettering in New York, were featured in the same book, in the back of the book. I wrote my first paper with this man. He had me do some legwork the summer before I started my internship. In the month I had, he had me working on a paper on fibroadenomas. And this one was, I wrote my second paper with Dr. Petrick. Charming woman, beautiful person, very intelligent, very hardworking. He had a number of other good friends. Lasala Fall, who were friends since the 1960s. when he came back from the Army and saw my father at a medical meeting. He thought Claude had a great capacity for friendship. Those relationships that one chooses for himself, not dictated by anything other than the desire to know another person better. You know, Dr. LaFall, those are the kind of flowery, glowing words that he uses. He also attributed my father as being instrumental in him being the first African-American president of the American College of Surgeons. And in truth, he was on the nominating committee, as was another member of the Atlanta community, Dr. Lamar McGinnis, who were crucial in terms of getting the fourth and fifth votes for that nomination to occur. And if Dr. McGinnis is on the line, he can chirp in on that in the discussion period. His another good friend was Hiram Polk, who said, you know, as he did in the little video that we had at the beginning on the icons, what's the right thing to do? He went on to say that no matter how great or small the issue, it seemed that Dr. Organ's focus always helped people to see the uniquely worthy goal. On countless occasions across our friendship, that question, that imperial pause that followed, helped me and dozens of other so-called surgical leaders and hundreds of young surgeons to come to a better conclusion, no matter what the subject. And this picture is actually taken at the first SBAS meeting in 1989 at Duke University. There are too many friends to list all the pictures. I am sorry that I left off the picture of Dr. Rozicki and Dr. Feliciano taken at their home several years ago, where they hosted my father for dinner one night. This is a picture of the Treblanches. They're hosting Manila along with my mother. Interestingly enough, Mrs. Treblanche, I believe, had a carcinoid tumor. When she would drink wine, she would flush. And my father said, "Have you thought about this?" So the travel, the friendships, here are some colleagues from the West African College of Surgeons, and some of their sons have come to train with, or did come to train with my father at UC Davis in the East Bay. He facilitated the travel of many young surgeons from parts of West Africa and South Africa to this country, and to train in places where they could get a good experience and go back to their country. Professor Reeves was this unbelievable gentleman who my father met on his first trip to Australia and other places. He visited our house on numerous occasions, was always very Australian. He was very opinionated, was very well spoken. Well, no discussion of my father could be left out, could be complete without looking at the family. This is when my brother Greg was graduating from medical school. Everybody showed up for that one. My mother was happy as hell. He was equally as happy because that tuition burden was off his back. My older brother Claude is a banker. My sister Rita is a art curator, is now working on doing exhibits for a variety of museums around the country. You guys know this person. This is my mother. My younger brother David is a geographer who works at Temple University. My sister Sandy was a soloist with the Houston Ballet for 20 years, ran a dance company of her own for 10, and now is semi-retired and married. My younger brother Paul, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and Greg, a pediatric surgeon. Another view of the family a little bit later in life with some gray hairs. This was taken a month or two before my father passed away. This is when my daughter, his daughter Sandy, got married to Carlos, an IT gentleman. And these are all the grandchildren, the wives, and others. So I'd like to end with some wisdom from the old man. He used to frequently say that what you put in your head, nobody can take away. We pass that on to our own children. He always tells people, steel sharpens steel just like one sharpens another. One man or woman sharpens another. There is no substitute for hard work, or he called it trench work. He would always tell you, okay, stop complaining, get back to work. He thought that a man should not be judged by how much money he's made, but how much tuition he's paid. And that it's attitude, not aptitude, that determines altitude. Thank you very much.
Dr. Organ, that was fabulous.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Feliciano, I saw you come on the line just shortly after Dr. Organ started speaking. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're really happy to see you here. I don't know, Dr. Organ, if we want to, I know Brendan has his presentation coming up, so maybe we'll sum up all of the comments afterwards, but I am I am just incredibly moved by that presentation you put forth, and I really appreciate you doing that. There are a lot of people here who knew your father, but I know of him as a legacy, and really feel like I wish I had been old enough to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Dr. Organ. That was really a wonderful presentation. I feel like, certainly to conclude on that slide, I feel like I've heard a lot of those things, mostly get back to work since I've been in my training. As a thank you and as a commemoration to both the contributions of you and your father to Emory, the Tom Dodson Society has actually purchased a copy of your father's book that will be donated to the Department of Surgery. This copy is actually signed by your father. So this will be, again, given to the Department of Surgery and will be available for the residents. For those who haven't seen this book before, not only does it include a chapter by Dr. Brian Organ, but also includes a chapter by Dr. A.C. Janssen and Dr. Warren himself. So again, a lot of Emory connections in this book, in addition to Dr. Organ's presentation. So thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see it? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. So again, as we mentioned, Dr. Organ is actually a Emory alumni and has been a longtime friend of the program. So this is actually a picture of Dr. Organ that he may remember very fondly. This is the chief resident class of 1988. So not only does it include Dr. Organ in his lovely blue bow tie, but it also includes his longtime partner, Rick Finley, Paul Rudisil, Paul Brock, and Mark Rudisil, Paul Brock, and Tom Pearson, again, all of whom have been really icons in the Emory legacy. Today I'll be presenting on George Goodfellow. He is perhaps best known as the surgeon of the Wild West, and some have called him the father of civilian trauma surgery, as one of the first American civilian trauma surgeons and trauma surgeons in the ex-military categories. As usual, despite my best attempts, I have no financial disclosures. Here's just a review of the Thomas Dodson Surgical Society. Again, this is our 6th meeting, and thank you, Dr. Organ, for presenting today. Hopefully, we'll be getting back to in-person meetings soon, and I look forward to seeing all of you back in person. As you recall, we always feature a picture of the chief residents for this one, and this one is a special one. Since Dr. Joe Sharma was talking about his very first appendectomy, I decided to feature him today. Here's Dr. Sharma in 2005, grinning just as broadly as anyone could, mostly because he realized he is finished with his residency. So George Emory Goodfellow. Today we'll be talking about his early life, his career in Tombstone, Arizona, what he means to the city of Tombstone, Arizona, his pioneership in the trauma laparotomy, and I really hope that Dr. Feliciano and Dr. Dente will chime in as frequently as they can about his contributions to trauma laparotomy, his role in the gunfight at the OK Corral, and his production of the first perineal prostatectomy in the world. So, Dr. Goodfellow was born in 1855 in Downeyville, California. His father was an engineer, a dentist, and a surgeon. He actually went to both a medical school and a dental school. in the 1800s. As you can imagine, a very different set of training skills there. His father was a surgeon for a number of railroad companies, so he moved throughout the American West during his childhood. He received his early schooling in Pennsylvania, and then in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Was very well known to those of us from Western Pennsylvania, and then finished at the California Military Academy. In 1871, he completed his freshman year in engineering at the University of California. He made the dean's list there, and in 1872, he was actually appointed to the U.S. Naval Academy as one of the two appointees from the state of California. Unfortunately, he was dismissed in 1872 due to a hazing incident where he assaulted the U.S. Naval Academy's first black cadet. I said he was an interesting person. I didn't say he was a good person. So he did what anyone with a short temper would do, and he moved to Ohio, where he finished his MD degree from the University of Worcester, which no longer has a medical school. In 1876, that same year, he married Catherine Colt. If those who recognize the name, that is this cousin of Samuel Colt, aka the Colt revolver fame. In his sister or his wife would become a significant part of his future career as the gunfighter surgeon. He moved to Prescott, Arizona to become the company doctor for a mining project. In the next few years, he served as a contract surgeon to the Army at Fort Whipple and Fort Lowell in Tucson, Arizona. And at that time, interestingly, he was actually assigned to George Custer's 7th Cavalry. Unfortunately, due to, or perhaps fortunately, due to some logistic conflicts, his orders to join the unit were delayed, and he actually missed the Battle of Little Bighorn, where Custer's entire battalion was decimated. He arrived in Tombstone, Arizona in 1880, and he opened his practice on the floor of a bar, which I think is Dr. Patrick Sullivan's dream, to open his practice on the floor of a bar. Tombstone was described as the condensation of wickedness by several people. In 1880, Tombstone, Arizona had 12 doctors, but only 4 of them had actually completed their medical education. So I was interested in why there's a place called Tombstone, Arizona, of all the things to be named for. I think that it's perhaps one of the more interesting town names.
I'm on one of these Zoom.
So Tombstone was actually founded in 1877 by a prospector. He and a group of U.S. cavalry set out from San Bernardino to Fort Huacha through the Apache country. At that time, he decided, hey, maybe the cavalry isn't for me. I'm going to start panning for silver. So he left his cavalry brigade to begin prospecting in the San Pedro Hills by himself. His cavalry mates told him that he would find nothing but his tombstone. In fact, what he did find was actually 3 large silver strikes that made him a fortune. So he named, being told he would find nothing but his tombstone, he named his first silver strike Tombstone. He named his second silver strike Graveyard, and he named his third one Tough Nut, kind of as a thumbing his nose at his former cavalry mates. In 1886, Tombstone was actually the 2nd largest city in the American West, about 15,000 inhabitants. And in that bottom left is a picture of Tombstone. Priya, as our resident Arizonian, can attribute to how hot it must be in there. But it's not the heat, it's the humidity. In 1880, again, he arrived in Tombstone, Arizona, and shortly thereafter, he became known as the gunfighter surgeon. This was mostly due to the fact that he was the surgeon who saw the highest acuity of gunshot trauma in his practice. A number of famous cowboys that he treated: Wyatt Earp and his 4 brothers, Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, Johnny O'Rourke, Curly Bill Brocius, Frank Leslie, John Ringo, Indian Charlie, the Clantons, and the McElroys. And actually, the Arizona Daily Star described him that he had presumably had a greater practice in gunshot wounds into the abdomen of any other man in civil life in the country. So why was he so well known for laparotomy for trauma? As you recall from some of our last presentations, in the late 1800s, the standard practice for abdominal gunshot wounds was still probing the wound in hopes of finding the bullet. If you remember from James Garfield's presentation, where a number of different surgeons were called in, and they essentially all put their dirty fingers into his wound and thus infected him and caused the president's death. A number of other things that were interesting. The lead bullets were used in the American West that were softer and traveled at lower velocities than those used in the East. This caused a significant trauma when they were entering the body, similar to how we think of hollow point bullets now. And also in the American West, people were using a higher caliber with more gunpowder loading into each shell than the East. In July 13th, 1881, he became the first person to describe a laparotomy for a gunshot wound. On July the 9th, 4 days prior to presentation, a 47-year-old gunfighter named Jack Smith, I'm sure that wasn't his real name, was brought to Goodfellow's office, having been shot in the abdomen by a .32 revolver on July the 4th. So as you can start doing the math, he's about 9 days out from his gunshot wound to the abdomen. As you can imagine, that was not posing well. Goodfellow described a single wound 1 inch below and to the left of the umbilicus. His abdomen was clearly peritonitic, with descriptions of a distended, erythematous, and tender abdomen. He actually watched him for another 4 days. Those serial abdominal exam notes written by the intern must have been very interesting. Goodfellow's paper describes, quote, seeing that he was rapidly sinking, I determined to perform an operation, the feasibility I which had been considering for some time, open the abdomen, clean and sew the intestinal wounds. It was a little alone in a little mining town. I was alone entirely, having no skilled assistance of any sort, and therefore was compelled to depend on aid of willing friends who were present, those consisting of hard-handed minders just from their work on account of the fight. So clearly he brought the gentleman who got shot, he brought his friends along who were his assistants in the operation. He performed his laparotomy, he repaired 6 enterotomies, and the patient actually survived. He would later go on to describe 5 other cases of laparotomy for gunshot wounds in the Southern Californian Practitioner in 1889. Interestingly, 4 of these patients survived, and his paper actually contains pretty interesting descriptions. One had a gastrotomy, one had a rectal injury, several others had colotomies. So he actually really was able to operate on a significant amount of the abdominal contents. He describes that the predominant views of the gunfighter is to shoot for the guts, knowing that death is certain, yet sufficiently lingering and agonizing to afford a plenary sense of gratification to the victor in the contest. I'll say in other kind of pioneering thoughts of the day, he pioneered the use of sterile prep. As you can imagine, Lister across the pond in England was using carbolic acid. He was using what he had at the time, which is what I'm enjoying right now, which is some excellent whiskey. He was actually doing essentially splash preps with alcohol as a method of sterile preparation. Over the course of his career, he published 13 articles about gunshot wounds based on the treatments that he received while practicing medicine in Tombstone. And I think what's interesting about this is he essentially says, unlike some of the ivory tower experiments of the kind of the places in the American East that we're describing, I'll say the surgeries at the time, while I have no experiments upon animals to record, the autopsies mentioned have given me equally as good data on which to base the assertions regarding the absolute necessity of intermediate interference of gunshot wounds of the abdominal cavity. In many of the autopsies made, I've frequently seen men shot in the abdomen fall and die within 15 or 20 minutes, open the cavity expecting to see some large size vessels cut and discovering nothing more than the free border of intestines torn for about a foot or so. So not only was he kind of challenging his own thoughts about gunshot laparotomy, but also thinking about the ways in which this can change surgical practice. Some of his other very interesting quotes in some of those 13 articles, he described people using people as festive or obstreperous citizens delighted themselves with toys such as 44 and 45 caliber Colt revolvers. Another one, he describes a gunshot fight that had 2 shots. The first shot took effect, the second shot going into the air because at that time he was on his back. And then perhaps probably the most interesting, it is inexcusable and criminal to neglect to operate upon a case of gunshot wound in the abdominal cavity. In his later years in Tombstone, he experimented with the bulletproof properties of silk. What he found is that he described 2 cases in which people were shot. They had either silk garments on or silk handkerchiefs in their pockets that seemed to stop the bullets. So he actually published on the bulletproof properties of silk. And it's been described that the price of silk after the publication of these increased by almost 800%. And this is one of the reasons why gangsters in Chicago in the Prohibition era were known for wearing silk vests. Again, that I can't substantiate that, but that is at least one of the proposed theories. He actually participated in the recapture of Geronimo, and his eventual transport to Florida, where he lived out the rest of his life in prison. He led a rescue team to Mexico to aid victims of an earthquake. He became known as the El Santo Doctor, and he was actually given a commendation of this horse that you can see in that bottom right-hand corner. He also acted as the coroner for the Tombstone, Arizona citizens, including some very interesting reports saying he found the body to be rich in lead, but not too punctured to hold whiskey. And a personal favorite of mine, he also described someone who was executed by hanging as dying from emphysema, which he described as a strangulation at a high height. Goodfellow's rule for the drinking surgeon, which I think is also Dr. Sullivan's rule for the drinking surgeon. He must be able, with the tips of his thumbs and forefingers covered in tape, to bring the heads of 2 needles together at arm's length and hold them there before operating. Again, something for us all to think about the next time we scrub in. So getting on to the gun fate at the OK Corral, perhaps best known for some of the later publications of its activities. This was actually a long simmering feud between rural and urban life. The rural ranchers and the cowboys resented the growing influence of the city residents over county politics. And the Earps were perhaps the best identification of city politics. They served as not only the sheriffs of the town of Tombstone, Arizona, but they also held a number of ownerships in several of gambling and saloon enterprises within the town. So there certainly were some conflicts of interest in who they would enforce the rules upon there. So again, long time simmering conflict between rural and urban life. In October 1881, there was a confrontation in downtown Tombstone, 2 different factions. The lawmen, led by the Earps and Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday was, of course, a dentist. And then the cowboys, including the Claibornes, the McClarys, and the Clantons. The lawmen said that the cowboy group faction were armed in violation of the local ordinance, where it said that it was illegal to carry firearms within the city of Tombstone, Arizona. And they shot at the cowboys. The cowboys proclaimed that they raised their hands, offered no resistance, and were shot in cold blood, and 3 cowboys were killed. So Goodfellow's office was actually directly across the street from the OK Corral, and he actually treated 2 of the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday's wounds from the confrontation, and he participated in the autopsies on the 3 cowboys that were killed. Interestingly, it was Goodfellow's testimony about the nature of Clanton's wounds, in which he said that it was impossible for him to have been raising his hands based on the trajectory of the bullet wounds that supported the defendants of the Earps' version of the events. And the judge, based on Goodfellow's testimony, ruled that the Earps acted in self-defense. Unfortunately, this was not the end of the confrontations based on this. So later in that same year, Marshal Virgil Earp was shot with a shotgun, and Goodfellow removed 4 inches of his humerus, and he was unfortunately left with a non-functional arm. And in 1882, he was the physician that pronounced Morgan Earp dead after he was shot in the back of the head while playing pool. So clearly some long simmering issues that Goodfellow's continued to play a role in. He eventually would move to Tucson, Arizona. In 1891, Dr. John Charles Handy, he was the surgeon to the Southern Pacific Railroad Company and would become the first chancellor of the University of Arizona, so thank you, Priya, was shot by his estranged wife's, his attorney. Goodfellow was requested from Tombstone to provide the care. So he essentially asked his mining friends if he could have a train engine. They taught him how to operate the train engine, and then he drove by himself all the way from Tombstone to Tucson to operate on Handy around these very tight mountain passes. Again, he had no training in driving a train. After, unfortunately, Handy died as a result of his wounds, they offered him Handy's job as the surgeon to the Southern Pacific Railroad Company, and he moved to Tucson, where he established a practice at St. Mary's Hospital, which you can see in that bottom right-hand corner. In December of 1891, that same year, he performed what was described as the first perineal prostatectomy. So previous to the perineal prostatectomy approach, all prostatectomies were done through a transabdominal operation, and this is perhaps the one that's best known as the John Hopkins approach. And essentially, he realized that in the lithotomy position, it was possible to obtain access to the prostate with minimal infiltration of the bladder. So here are several quotes from that paper. I think this is probably interesting in that a well-known country doctor demonstrated his technique to Hugh Hampton Young of Johns Hopkins, who at the time was doing transabdominal prostatectomies. And Hugh Hampton Young thus took up the perineal prostatectomy approach and brought it into modern practice. At this time, Dr. Goodfellow was an early pioneer of spinal anesthesia using cocaine. Unfortunately, he described several instances where that did not go well, so he actually stopped using cocaine as a spinal anesthetic. And he produced a case series in 1904 of 78 cases of perineal prostatectomy, of which resulted no fistula or incontinence, which is a significant improvement over the transabdominal approach to prostatectomies. I just thought this quote was interesting in terms of his, I'll say, unitary fascination with the prostate. We soon become tired of everything in life. Riches fatigue the possessor. Ambition, when satisfied, leaves only remorse behind. The joys of love are but transient joys. So with the prostate gland, too soon it tires us. All but quickly does it become superfluous wealth. The ambition to remain as we were vanishes, and if we insist too long, remorse follows. The joys of love only increase the troubles, and the desire to remodel the part of the anatomy about which the neck of the bladder becomes the dominating and insistent part of our existence. If that's not the most poetic thing that you've ever read about the prostate, I don't know what is. In his later life, Goodfellow would move to Los Angeles. He would actually serve on the as part of the delegation in Cuba of the Spanish-American War. And there are stories that he was one of the delegation that actually was participating in the Spanish surrender. In 1900, he moved to San Francisco. Unfortunately, all of his documents were destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And in 1910, he died after suffering several bouts of multiple neuritis, which some folks would now call alcohol withdrawals. So Goodfellow's impact on surgery. He was a pioneer in trauma laparotomy. He's been described by several as the trauma of civilian trauma surgery. He described a successful approach for prostatectomy through a perineal approach, and he participated in several colorful instances of life in the American West as one of the few surgeons to some of the most interesting people in that era. Again, thank you for Dr. Organ for presenting at this meeting. Thank you to Dr. Dodson, Dr. Srinivasan, all of our guests, and would look forward to speaking with you at the next meeting.
Will you allow questions, Brendan?
Yes, please.
For Brian, I'm superannuated myself, so I'm curious to know, Brian, how long your dad had been retired before he died, and also the cause of death.
Congestive heart failure was the cause of death. He had been ill for about a year, I'd say. He struggled the last year in his travels. He took a delegation to South Africa and one other trip, but that was, he was used to traveling half a dozen times a year internationally. That, you know, it just, I think he was tired.
What was his age, Brian?
78.
78.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'd be interested in knowing about home life. How was it having a dad who was such a remarkable figure and seemingly, to me at least, was gone a lot? How was your home life?
It was busy. I mean, when he was home, he was directing traffic. I mean, we all had responsibilities. I mean, with 7 kids, I mean, and you know, mom couldn't take care of all that, so there were chores. I mean, somebody cut the grass, somebody emptied the trash, somebody helped with the dishes, somebody helped with the laundry, and that rotated from week to week. And if you didn't toe the line, well, there was a conversation to be had and other issues at the end of the day when Dad showed back up. Mom was pretty persuasive, and you know, My father wasn't a person who spared the rod early in life, but after 5 or 6, I mean, he didn't do that to you. He just kind of made you feel bad. He said, your mother, you're really disappointing your mother, which would make a son feel horrible, But there were times when it was kind of hard because he would have to leave and go to the hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning to go operate on somebody, and here you are, you got to wake up and go shovel 2 feet worth of snow to get dad out of the driveway into the hospital, and then push him halfway down the street because we lived in the country, so to speak. So that was kind of tough, and then but he was always interested in your life. Dinner time at the Organ household, you had to give an account for what you did that day or that week, and you better fess up, and because otherwise your brothers and sisters would tell on you, which led to other things. But but he was gone a lot. We called him the Pan Am Professor. In fact, I don't think my brother's on here, Paul, who was a psychiatrist, but one time this is probably in the late 90s after he had gotten another one of the honorary fellowships somewhere in the world. He says, well, Dad, you're kind of like the black surgical Jim Kirk. You've gone where no black man has gone before. And my father quipped, he said, I sat there and watched that show with your sisters one day, and I didn't really understand all the funny creatures, but that guy Spock with the pointy ears, I kind of liked him. He was logical. So, I mean, he was an interesting guy to be around. It was always, he did work a lot in terms of study. Later in the evenings, he would, take a nap, and after dinner, and he'd get up and work until later in the evening. He would always call you down when there was something on his mind, and he wanted to talk to you about something, something that you had either excelled at or done wrong. He'd want to know the reason. And I can remember, I guess it was in college when I was deciding I wanted to do medicine and surgery in particular. And I was home, and I was watching him operate with one of the residents back in the day when you could come into the operating room and do that. And this resident was taking a little heat because he got through the first or second line of questions with my father, but he wasn't, handling the instruments right or something. And my dad was getting on him a little bit about do it this way. Come on, I keep telling you, do it this way. So he looked over at me and said, is he like this at home? I said, dude, you're lucky. You've only got him for 5 years. I got him for a lifetime. So it was there were always interesting parts to it, but yeah, with 7 of us at home, you always had company.
Great presentation, Brian. We loved it.
Thank you.
Dr. Organ, this is Priya.
Hey, Priya.
Greetings from Arizona. Thank you so much for that presentation. I learned a lot. I'm sad I'm not old enough to have known your dad also, but I'm glad you and I got to know each other. You mentioned that your dad's very candid, which I very much appreciate, and I think I won't bore everyone with my thoughts about toasts and how toast should be a toast and not a burning loaf of bread. But I am curious to know what your dad would think about recent statistics about specifically Black men in medicine and how we're actually doing worse than we were in the 70s as far as matriculating the numbers of people we need to treat our patient population. Did he ever talk candidly about this to you and your brothers specifically about this?
About getting into medicine, you mean?
Yeah, getting into medicine, but also about how we can get more people, and not just people of color, but specifically Black people, into medicine.
Well, he with respect to Black men, he said we ought to take our lessons from the football coach. Go find the best athletes, invite them to a prospect camp. So that was part of the genesis of the Society of Black Academic Surgeons. If you provided people with a forum where they could learn what the job was, learn how to do it better, that was a way of doing it. And like anything in life, I think exposure, he used to say exposure is everything. He definitely said that in the operating room. He said it also at home. He says, what you're exposed to determines what you're able to do. And we were exposed to a lot of things, a lot of different kinds of people. But he thought that there was too much, especially in the latter part of the 20th century, too much TV representation of Black men as less than honorable people. Even the Huxtables, he wouldn't even watch it. I mean, it's like, it's not a positive image to a certain extent. I mean, it's good that he and his wife are doing something noble, but he thought that the emphasis should be more on people, showing people doing noble things.
Yes.
Some of the modern literature and TV and visual things that out there are getting to that. Some of the movies and things. But he thought early exposure. One of the efforts of the college about 10 years ago was to get Black students in the cities that the college would go to come to an afternoon or a day with the college and be shown around to different exhibits, meetings with young students. That still exists, but the majority of the students who show up to those forums are multicultural. So that reaching out still needs to occur. It's a difficult thing to do when you're, I would anticipate. I mean, I did it once or twice, but when you're coming to a meeting and taking time off of work and spending all that money to be there and to see things, sometimes the students are a little less than attentive. They can be a little rowdy. So you can do it for an hour or two, but sometimes it's difficult.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I think the idea of starting a pipeline, refreshing that idea for all of us around the country is important. And I think your dad is a great advisor from afar for that.
Well, one of the things that I have seen at Emory in the past is they have a summer program where they put people through a mini medical school. Is that right? Does that still exist?
I'm not sure. The Emory, it does. It does here too at U of A, Phoenix.
Yeah, I actually taught at that my first year in medical school. I taught the program at Emory.
That's awesome.
But that should get more publicity, especially amongst the people who work inside the Emory system, the nurses' kids, the faculty's kids. I think that, there's no shortage of people that ask me, can we come rotate with you? That's not a thing that's allowed anymore in hospitals for a variety of reasons. But that was, a frequent way that young kids that I have encountered have gotten involved. And I probably have 10 or 15 people that I've, seriously mentored out of college and into medical school who did do medicine, and I hear from occasionally. From as far away as Alaska, South America.
Awesome.
It's.
Yeah, just to make a point, as Dr. Dotson says, I think it requires buy-in from all of us, not just some of us. Thank you so much.
Well, Brian, I just want to give my thanks also for all the work that your dad did. It's Wendy for the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, and seeing him at the college and creating a space for us to be able to be around leaders in surgery and see what excellence looks like. So I always appreciated that about your dad and him chronicling the history of Black surgeons and for it being a reference book for us.
I understand that there is is Don Nakayama on the call still? Don Nakayama is editing a book for the American College of Surgeons on minority surgeons in America, I do believe. I hope I'm not spilling the beans for Don, but he's contacted me about things as well.
And we have an upcoming diversity symposium through the American Surgeon that will be published shortly, and addressing some of the diversity issues and advancement through trying to address the pipeline. So we're trying to put out some work in that space as well through the Society of Black Academic Surgeons, trying to put data to the academic promotion and pipeline for professorship along that continuum also, and where we stand at 0.78%.
Well, I think that my dad's big push was in academic surgery, but he really wanted people in general to be into medicine. Now, how you stimulate that in this day and age with some of the challenges that exist medically inside hospitals, and I don't think I'd call it socially, but people feeling safe, but certainly extra bodies on a floor moving patients, being young strapping men who it's kind of hard to be there and do those things and be not subjected, but potentially encounter something that, take your life, like COVID. There are a lot of restrictions in that regard. I think that there's got to be a way, and I think there probably is, to encourage youth, maybe even financial stipends if they are to participate in something on weekends or in summer programs. I think those are the kind of things that once you're in the mix and you can see what people are doing, either in an operating room or in certain parts of the hospital where you're just not the scut puppy all the time, but you get pulled into what's actually happening in the thought processes, where you're rounding with a team of some sort from time to time, and those are potentially ways to stimulate young folks. I mean, Dave, Feliciano, you've been at this a while. What do you think? You're muted, Dave.
My wife muted me. She didn't want me to say anything.
Tell Grace we said hello. What do you think, Barb? You've been in the business a while too. You and Tom.
Well, I'll tell you what I remember about your dad. He was one of my 6 examiners for my oral exam in general surgery. And when I got into his room, he just started with these rapid fire questions, scared the crap out of me. I walked out of the room. I had no idea whether or not to answer any of his questions right or not. I think we're doing a really good thing at Emory with the pipeline program, which is has been institutionalized within the medical school. It's a program for that has relationships with a lot of urban high schools in Atlanta, and they come to the people go out to the high schools, but they also come to the campus. And every year I conduct at least one suture lab for those kids. And I think it is really hard now to do what we used to do, which is to take kids into the operating room with us. Yeah. I mean, even when I was at Grady, we were still able to get permission to take kids into the operating room with us, but that just isn't happening anymore at all. But I think if you have a robust simulation lab and you have people that are interested in interacting with the kids and showing them some of the toys that you use, and I think that's almost as good. It's not quite as good, but I think that's almost as good at stimulating them and getting them interested in pursuing their education, sticking with it, and you know, and I also think that those of us who dealt with kids as physicians, you know, I used to say to kids in my office, I used to say, you know, the older kids anyway, the ones you could talk to, not the little bitty ones. But I used to say, you know, hey, you know what? I'm looking for a partner, you know, and to interact with them in a way that makes it seem like it's an accessible thing for them. You know, you could do this.
Yeah. I mean, medicine's a long apprenticeship. It's, you know, it's 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and then time for residency. And then, you know, you residents are paid a lot better now than we were back in the day.
God, yeah.
Something my father told me as well. I think I think you bring up a good point. I think simulation labs is a good place to start. I think that, you know, reaching out to the children of sororities, fraternities, people, you know, bodies of African Americans who want their kids to aspire to something like that. I think reaching out to those folks, and they'll bring others along with them. Might be one way of looking into that as a thought. I mean, you have all kinds of things here in the city, all kinds of little groups of kids. One that comes to mind that I can remember from my childhood was Jack and Jill's.
Well, Boys and Girls Clubs is very,
Boys and Girls
active.
Clubs, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there are, you know, ways to do it. I mean, but you got to be like the football coach. You got to, you know, look under every rock, or, you know, for a good player. And it does take a lot sometimes. And they don't just come and, you know, it's because it's a hard apprenticeship. But and maybe sometimes you just go after the ones that are the good students. You ask the schools, who are the people that, you know, have an interest in. There's a men's group that I'm a part of that we look for those individuals, and we provide them with opportunities to see different parts of the city, architecture, engineering, medicine. One of the visits was to this E6 lab over at Georgia Tech, not E6, I forget what it's called, but it's the dry lab that they have for doing pigs and things over at Georgia Tech.
T3.
T3.
Yeah.
That was an incredible experience for them. You know, dentist offices and things like that. So there are some things that are being done out there. It's just probably just need to do more of it. And I think kids, as they go through high school and college, there are other, you know, medicine and science is hard. It's just hard. I mean, and you got to really want it. And that's where the media could probably help us a lot by showing some of these images in programs that people watch.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Hey, Dr. Smith.
Hey, Brian.
How you doing, sir?
Doing very well, thank you. Enjoyed your presentation greatly.
Thank you.
And knew your dad mostly from surgical meetings, but he was inspiration.
Thank you.
Hey, Brenda, excellent job tonight. Bang up as per norm. Dr. Organ, this is Emeka. Very
How you doing?
Presentation, so very well, very well. Now, I had no idea of the way by which your dad ultimately matriculated to medical school. Very insightful. So one quick question for you, and it's, we all understand how powerful of a building block they can be. The word was habit, sir? Habit.
I'm losing I lost you some of the audio. Can you restate that?
Yeah, it's centered around this topic of habits. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. So we all understand how powerful of a building block they can be. So my question is to you, specifically, are there any distinct habits that you saw your father employ, particularly outside of the hospital, that you felt served to his advantage or benefit and could be potentially beneficial for any surgeon, especially those early on in their career?
Outside of the hospital, I mean, I think my dad, his hobby was surgery. His hobby was medicine. His hobby was education, and then travel. The friends that he had, they were through things that he did in medicine, or his good friend Whitney Young, who was president of the Urban League, and the guy who cut his hair, a guy named Ernie Chambers, who in the state of Georgia was the longest. It was the dean of the unicameral. Nebraska is controlled by not two houses, but just one group of legislators. And he's been a legislator from the district in Omaha for probably 40 years. He and his brother were very, and Malcolm X was from Omaha, so they knew Malcolm. They were very socially aware. They would bring my father into things that they thought were appropriate for him, or would ask his opinion about things that were happening in the city. Ask for his help, because my father did sit on corporate boards, and he had friends who could help out or donate to causes. One of the things my dad did was he was a big fundraiser for the United Negro College Fund back in the 60s and 70s through these kind of relationships. And so I think that to answer your question more specifically, I think you find some organizations and some causes, and you have friends that you think are worthy of things that you want to do in the city. I mean, my own self, probably early on in life, after residency, probably bit off too much. I had a good friend Michael Lomax, who was Fulton County Commission Chair, who got me involved in a number of county type things. The major thing of which was Grady Hospital. Was on their board of trustees for 4 or 5 years. That was an interesting experience, learning about healthcare in that environment, and the monies that were involved, the medical schools that were involved, the personalities, the legalities of everything. So I mean, your friends and the patients that you take care of. I not infrequently ask my patients what do they do, so I can better tell them how to prepare for the pre-op and the post-operative period, and their families, because it's an important part of the process of recuperation. So, and in that capacity, I've met a lot of different people. And I think there's different organizations that you all have the ability to be a part of, whether it's a fraternity or something like that you ought to. Those are things that can draw you into the community and out of your bubble of medicine. So, I mean, I encourage that. I mean, playing sports was a big thing. I used to play tennis. I was usually led around by my wife, who was a better tennis player than I was, even though I taught her. But we'd play on teams together and meet different people that way. So
leveraging one's personal relationships.
Correct. Yeah.
Get it.
And then you can join different organizations too. I mean, and ask the people for things like Leadership Atlanta, or there are leadership programs inside different hospital systems. Those are ways of meeting people across systems that do different things who are not inside your particular realm, or inside organized medicine.
Got it.
Brian, thank you very much. I mean, it's an inspirational talk. Not the video, but you talking about this, and the way you've outlined it is phenomenal. The video is great, but you speaking it makes all the difference. He had a corporate interest, and I always think a little bit about this. What would he think about? There was articles on PET scans and NMRs or current MRIs. what would you think about the current cost of healthcare? And as being, as you know, in that influential position of the American College of Surgeons.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, he would frequently say that other people have it better than we do. We are cost center driven in this country. You might have, you know, 100 CT scanners in this city, or more probably. Some of them people's offices, individual practice offices, where healthcare is more paid for by the government. They, you know, ration or they have to justify use and purchase of additional equipment based upon the numbers. And then I think when new technologies come out, I mean, that's always a big issue. And for a good example for a general surgeon is mesh or the robot. I mean, it was an interesting tool, but it took a while to develop because of the experiences with laparoscopy and the cost of it. So now that it's shown in certain situations that it can be more useful because of, you know, ergonomics for the surgeon, I think it's got pliability. But he was a big believer that we have to have frank discussions about, you know, do we take care of everybody or do we just take care of a few people who can afford it? And he was a big believer in everybody should have something, and then those that want more or need more, society needs to really look at how we adapt technology. And we don't necessarily do that in this country. We tend to, okay, just the Nike philosophy, just do it, use it. And the push is there to, you know, to use new technology, to do something different, new, make a name for yourself. But then how is that compared in a prospective, randomized, double-blinded way? And is that, you know, necessary for every little thing? It's hard to know. I mean, I think that's how he would view it.
Thank you. I think he would be critical of what.
Yeah, he would. He would definitely be critical. I mean, but in a gentle way. He would point out the spectrum of possibilities, and then say we got to compare that to what we really need, what society needs, and what the people need. And then he asked the question, you know, like Hiram would say, you know, what's the right thing to do here? Then everybody would look around the room and say, okay, you know, got to think about it a little bit more. But there will always be those who jump out there and take technology to the next level. And we probably need some of those people. The question is, how do you justify doing that across the entire population? And is it every little piece of mesh, every little piece of suture that needs to go through that kind of deliberation before it's used more widely? And so you have these competing things, people who want to sell you something and the people who want to provide for all. So yeah, where the answer is, that's one of those $64 million questions. But you know, guys like you are trying to figure ways to figure that out, right?
Sure.
In terms of the studies, the quality studies, and comparing things. But he would say we probably need to have more aggressive comparisons before we adopt big things.
Brendan, great evening, great presentation, very inspirational story. You're lucky to have that wonderful man as your father.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
He frequently mentioned his time at the Georgia Surgical as well, and the time he came down for that. So
good.
He would always ask about, have you been back to Sea Island?
Yep. Not much to Sea Island lately, but otherwise doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Thank
you for inviting me.
You bet.
All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, Dr. Organ. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There are more books available, I think, of the Century of Black Surgeons. I don't know who has them, but I know that there are some out there. And Emory's Library, I think I've already given them a copy. Unless somebody took it off the shelf.
We have a expanding collection where we commemorate one book per session.
I see.
So this will become part of the chair McKinnon Library that we named the library off the TFD Society for Dr. McKinnon. So
Okay.
this
Good
was
to see
really
everybody.
wonderful. Thanks. So good to see you.
Thank you.